Schools, pupils and parents face a real crisis about sex. Teachers are caught in the middle. Should they do more to combat an epidemic of sexual infections and teenage pregnancies? And if so, what? Hello and welcome to the big debate. Let's go straight to the facts about teenage sex. Government research and opinion polls both tell the same story. Nearly half of all teenagers lose their virginity by the age of 16. Teenage pregnancy rates are by far the highest in Europe. Sexually transmitted infections, or STIs, among teenagers continue to spiral virtually unchecked. Professionals in the field say there are many causes, and among them, Britain's popular culture. Magazines, music and fashion, they insist, are promoting a sexual revolution among the young that's causing them and our society serious harm. The government's responded to the challenge of teenage sex by pledging, one way or another, to halve teenage pregnancy by 2010. It's also sponsored STI awareness campaigns aimed at the young and given its backing to specialist teacher training. The good news for the government is that over 90% of adults want SRE, sex and relationship education, as you'll know, taught in schools. But what kind of SRE? When should it start? And who should teach it? Those are the central questions in this big debate. With me is a panel of practitioners and providers in the field of sex education, and also, as it were, a consumer. In our audience, a diverse range of teachers, advisors, parents and pupils. Let's start with a pretty fundamental question. What do schools actually teach young people about sex? Given all the statistics, you might think they know as much, if not more, than most adults. But if what young people are telling each other in the playground is anything to go by, they don't.
I got told once that you can't get pregnant if you're having sex standing up.
Using Coca-Cola as a lubricant.
You can't get pregnant if you whip it out before you ejaculate.
Thinking that during sex, the testicle would roll into the woman and that would hatch as a baby, as if it was some kind of egg.
If you come in like a swimming pool or something, you could get pregnant through stuff like that.
And they say it all complete seriousness, and it's just like, no, that's a little rubbish.
Yeah.
We'll pick up exactly on that. First of all, with you, Beth and Nicole, those, as it were, are your peers talking. Is it quite like that, a lot of ignorance?
Well, I've found that I have friends from lots of different schools, and there's a real variety of different types. Like, I've got a relatively good education, I would say, but I've got friends who have been given nearly nothing, and I actually have a friend who's been given no sex education whatsoever. And I find that absolutely shocking that they can have such different types.
It's totally patchy, in effect.
Yes, exactly.
Let me bring in one or two members of the audience. Natasha, you in fact are a teenage mother, aren't you? Did you have any sex education at school of any kind, or was it not of any use?
I had a few sessions in secondary school, but it was only one or two. It wasn't very much, and I didn't find it very interesting. And
did you know much about, as it were, the birds and the bees, or the emotional complications of that?
Not really, no. I didn't really know a lot.
Hiwa, beside you, you're in a similar situation. You're a mum.
Yes, I am.
And what about you? How was it at school for you?
It wasn't much of education, I could say. It wasn't much help, and I wasn't too interested in the subject.
People often leave out the other half of this equation, as it were. Tom, what kind of education at school have you had about, or are you getting about sex?
It's sort of a very physical thing of this is what happens, whereas it doesn't deal with the emotions of it, which we haven't been told about or done anything at all.
So do you find that really difficult or just very inadequate?
I think it's quite inadequate, and that there should be more emphasis placed on the emotional side of it as well.
That's really helpful as a starting point. Let me bring in our panel then. First of all, Anna Rayburn, famous as what's called an agony aunt, but having taken for a long time a really serious interest in this issue. You've got the birds and the bees, and you've got human emotions. What do you think the focus should be in schools?
I don't believe you can separate the two. If you separate the two, you're actually talking about producing psychopaths. Emotions and sexual behaviour are interrelated. If you separate them, you're not talking about responsibility, you're not talking about affection, you're not talking about expressing yourself or feeling good things. You're talking about one person as a predator and the other person as a victim.
And Jill Francis, from the National Children's Bureau, amongst many other things, do you share the view that it's almost self-evident, as Anna has suggested, that it isn't just about biology, however simply or complicated that can be taught?
Well, I think it's important to listen to what the young people are saying. And what young people are saying is they want the adults in their life. And remember, it's not just teachers doing sex education, it's parents and doctors and nurses. Lots of people have a part in this. And what young people are saying is what they want to talk about is real life. And they want to talk about the sort of dilemmas that they're going to have to face and really think those things through. Actually knowing the biology, I mean, I've often said you can go all your life and not know how to spell fallopian tube. You don't really need to know about a fallopian tube. What you need to have is the confidence to be able to talk about sex, to talk to other people about sex and to get help when you need it.
John Tripp, you are a paediatrician and you run a scheme which is called APAWS, the meaning of that being, I presume, postpone.
It stands for Added Power and Understanding in Sex Education.
How do you view the focus? What should it be?
I think the focus is exactly as the young people have told us and both our previous panellists. It should be both together and integrated. And in order to achieve that, it does mean that teachers need skills additional to those which they need for teaching other subjects. So that there are real problems for teachers who are often not even volunteering to do this work, but are faced with having to do sex education as part of their role as a tutor and doing something quite different to their normal teaching experience. So I think one of the people in the equation we really need to consider supporting are the teachers themselves.
Right, which we will most certainly be coming on from. There was a murmur of approval for what you were saying then. We've got, at this point, as it were, a consensus. I suspect the consensus may not last as we drive through these things, but we've got a consensus is that SRE should offer something beyond biology. Question is what? Department of Education guidelines suggest a dual approach. On the one hand, promoting a socially responsible attitude towards sex as being a vital part of family life. On the other, offering practical advice on contraception, sexual health, abortion, subjects which some parents may find objectionable. So which approach should be taken? Let me come to you, Jane English, on this. You're a head teacher. How does one get the balance right if that dual approach that I've just outlined is what is being expected of you or sought from you?
I think it's very important that education is seen as a partnership between schools and parents, and I think schools need to be in consultation with their parents, informing them what they are going to be delivering in the sex education and relationships programme, and I think they need to share any concerns or anxieties that they have. And certainly within my school, we do teach sex and relationship education, Year 7, Year 8, Year 9, and then we have a different programme in Years 10 and 11. But any parents that have any concerns, we talk with them, they share their views. I think the worry for many parents is they remember their school days. They don't necessarily want the teacher they dislike the most in their school days delivering sex and relationship education to their children.
Does, once you get beyond biology, into emotions, for some people at least, questions of morality come into play as well?
I think it probably does, because sex and relationship education, I think, is a very small part. The sex bit is very small. It's far more about respect. It's far more about decision-making. It's about knowing the facts. I think we insult young people if we think by giving them information means they're going to behave in a sexually promiscuous way, because they're not going to.
Let me just think, I just want to press the point, perhaps raise it with John Tripp. Once you get into the territory of morality, is there a responsibility for to give children a perspective on the moral issues at stake? Do you believe in that?
I think it's really important to help children develop their own moral perspective, and that's not something that teachers are unfamiliar with. A good teacher is a very important role model for children in school. And I think teaching respect, teaching people to value each other, teaching people responsibility is very much part of a good general education. And so it fits into the context of a good secondary education, which teachers are familiar with.
Does it
Whether it's right to talk about it in moralistic terms is a different question. Teachers may have their own moral code, which may not be that of the pupil, but at least they need to assist pupils to thinking about values, to think about their values and their own morality.
Miriam, David, you wanted to come in and you've been very patient.
It is very important both to listen to the voices of young people about what kinds of things they want, but also that the teachers themselves have their own lives and their own issues, and they also need some support for how they teach sex and relationship education.
Let me bring in from the audience a teacher on this. Pushpachara. Yes. We were talking about, it's more than biology, it has to be emotions. Does it have to be values as well if it's going to be effective?
I think values are very important because the young children, if they don't understand the values, they will not face up to life as we want them to. So values are very important.
But there are obviously cultural differences in our society. How, as a teacher, does one manage those? Is it your own individual view, or can you define, as it were, a general view which will embrace all pupils? Because otherwise you have real difficulties, don't you?
We have to see it from the modern world, not only one culture, but as the whole world, and teach them accordingly to fit into the whole society, not into their own society.
Just beside you, or nearby you, Deborah Clark, you were nodding your head at that.
Well, I think the whole point is that depends on the individual child and how they've been brought up in the first place and what messages they're getting from elsewhere, and creating the balance so that you can fill in the gaps and know what that child needs to learn.
Anna.
If you looked at all the religions that are represented in this room, and you looked at all the religions which are represented in schools in London, for example, in North Kensington, there are something like 96 races, 96 languages. There will be an enormous number of religions. There will be basic principles, basic moralities, which will be common to all of them. We used to call that comparative religions. It used to be a subject which was taught in schools. It's kind of ironic to hear us harking back to it now, as if we went away from it, and now we see that it was actually a sensible way forward. It wouldn't matter whether you were Muslim and I was a Jew. We would not kill. We have to have a basis upon which to work. We teach honour and respect.
Let me just, those are very important general concepts. Do you say, you can say, for instance, it is unwise, if you seek to say, it is unwise to, and it's illegal to have sex at the age of 15, for example. But do you say to someone, it is wrong to do this? If you're a 16-year-old or 17-year-old, do you say it is wrong to do this? Or is that a judgment for others to make, not teachers? Yes.
Well, I think it's turning the question round. And we're talking about education here. We're not talking about indoctrination. So it's much more likely, and what I see good teachers do, is I see them talking to young people and saying, when do you think you might be ready? So what you're doing is promoting them, building up their moral framework. So you're talking to them about that and helping them starting to make that decision. And generally speaking, most young people will say that, I mean, if we talk to these young people, they'll probably say, well, you shouldn't have sex too young because you can't take responsibility for it.
Bethany, what's your reaction to this?
I think it's a lot where you live. I think that affects it. I mean, like in London, it's going to be, the rate of where, when you start having sex, it's going to be a lot different to where, somewhere slightly different, maybe in the countryside. It's a lot about, I think that affects it very much.
Why do you think that makes a difference, Bethany?
Well, that's just in my experience. Yeah. I found that a lot. There's only very few of my friends have actually started, and I'm nearly 17 now, so I don't know, that's from me, and I've got friends in other places, and they have, and...
There's so many... Viv Crouch, you were very keen to get in.
Well, I was just thinking that difference and diversity, it underpins our society, and it's really important that we help young people to look at their own attitudes, their own values, but looking at the bigger picture as well, is that if we've got good sex education, we also need the places for young people to be able to go and get the help that they need as well. And I think that that's really important, that we have, it's a cultural thing, is that we have to get over our Englishness to a certain extent and recognise that some young people are having a sexual relationship and they need help then to be able to get condoms, the pill, or any form of contraception that they need.
John Tripp, on that first of all.
I would fully support that, but at the same time, this question of whether it's a moral issue or not, I think is confusing. Individuals have moral stands. As a society, we give extraordinarily mixed messages to young people about sexuality. So the whole of the media and everything they experience is that have it as soon as you can get it. And the idea that we don't as a society, not in schools, but as a society as a whole, we do not give clear messages to young people about the dangers to their physical and emotional health from early involvement. Of those third, which is the correct figure of young people who have intercourse before the age of 16, more than half of the girls and a large percentage of the boys will regret it. Now, we're not clear enough about giving young people those warnings.
So what does that warning entail? What does the warning entail?
It means explaining to young people that, tempting as it may be, and apparently normal as they perceive it to be, actually, first of all, it's not normal. Most young people haven't had sex before 16, as Francis says, and so we need to emphasise the normality of not having sex before your late teens. And secondly, we need to emphasise to young people that, you know, sex is something that lasts for a lifetime. Many young people think by the time you're 25, you've missed the boat.
Now, let me ask Natasha, at school, did you feel sort of under pressure in some way that it was the right thing to do to have sex when you did? Or was it just because you fancied the idea or you were in love?
I felt I was ready.
You felt you were ready?
Yeah.
And you felt that really strongly?
And I felt a bit pressured as well.
But so you didn't feel pressured, is the point?
I did feel pressured.
You did feel pressured? I'm sorry. I thought you said you thought you were ready.
I was ready, but a lot of my friends were saying they were having sex, and because I was in a relationship, I thought I was ready, and me and him just decided to have sex.
I was the same. What was your situation?
I was in love. I thought I was in love with him, so I thought, yes, I'm ready. You know, when I'm ready, I'm ready, and then. When I was 16, that's when I thought, yeah, today.
It's so confusing because the people that you see in the newspapers, the so-called celebrities, the explosion of teen magazines, which has all come in my lifetime, is all about doing it, getting away with it, enjoying it. Certainly you don't get pregnant, you don't get chlamydia, you don't have a problem with it, it'll be wonderful, it'll be fine. And all that is going on parallel with teachers and parents and thoughtful people trying to make good arrangements for young people. The conflict is extraordinary. And there's nothing worse for children than mixed messages.
And at that point, we're going to take a pause. Of course, this aspect of the debate raises a crucial issue as well. When should we start teaching about sex? At primary school? And who should teach it? That's in a moment. Welcome back to the big debate on sex in the classroom and the thorny question of primary schools. Extending primary sex education beyond the science curriculum is perhaps understandably a controversial move, both for parents and for some teachers. Yet in many primary schools it is already happening, as in the London borough of Hackney, for example, where the Christopher Winter Project helps primaries deliver comprehensive sex education. Let's have a very brief look now as Project Director Paula Power explains how sex education works in one of their schools, Holmley Primary.
Does it store meat?
There are ways of stopping the sperm from joining with the egg, and the condom is one of those.
Some teachers and parents worry that we're introducing SRE too early. Our experience has been that because children live in a very sexualised society where there's a great deal of sexual information in the newspapers, on television and in videos, children often have a lot of information and sometimes have a lot of misconceptions as well.
Well done for the stuff on condoms and the pill. I thought that was brilliant.
Right, okay.
Really clear and fantastic.
One of the most enjoyable things about doing this kind of work is kind of answering those real genuine tell me about this question.
What we're bringing to schools is the idea that it's sex and relationship education, and actually that we're not doing biological scientific lessons. We're placing sex in the context of relationships. We're talking about relationships and about the physical and emotional changes that occur in puberty. It's not just about sexual information.
Because the kids were saying
their own ideas, you don't know what they're going to say next, and I find that really difficult.
Legs, where is it going to go?
Both. Penis.
Penis, where's that going to go?
Male.
Male, well done, good boy.
That's right.
I think many teachers worry that they won't be able to answer the children's questions or that the subject matter will become too difficult for them to handle. What we try to show to teachers is that if you set up good ground rules and boundaries, that they can contain the lesson and they actually are in control of it and not the other way
Does anyone know what the
around.
little stick is? Tampon. Tampon, well done. It's something that people use when they're having a period.
What time are you going to use these then?
When you're in your period.
When you've got your period, right.
Why do you think we showed the boys some of the things to do with periods?
Maybe that when they're older, and they have children who are girls, and so they can tell them what they need for when they're older.
What an excellent answer.
Good. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes.
I think that some parents, some teachers even, and certainly some newspaper columnists would be very surprised and in some cases shocked by the degree of detail which is being taught to children who are at primary school, the age that we just saw then. Bethany, from your perspective, would it be, I mean, how young can you start, do you think, usefully?
I think probably it should be at primary school. I think there should definitely be a basis put in at that point, and it should be built up over the years, getting more technical, because you can't tell a child something about chlamydia because they just won't understand, they won't grasp that concept. And I think at secondary school, that's when you should really be getting into the technical things. But I think from a young age, if you start talking about it, it'll really get rid of this taboo that's around it at the moment. Because when you're at a young age, they don't talk about it, and suddenly in secondary school, you're being told all these things. So I think it will really get rid of the taboo if people are talking about it all throughout the school career.
John Tripp, thank you. What do you feel about it?
Well, two things really. I think it's absolutely right, there should be a basis. We're talking about relationships education. Young people need to know about different sorts of relationships at a much younger age than secondary school. They need to learn about special relationships, they need to learn about intimate relationships, that they exist so that they can distinguish different sorts of relationships. So I think that's really important. How far it should go, I think I have to speak as a doctor and as a scientist. I just don't know whether it's good or bad for young people. There is no data. I think we should be circumspect about what we do and how we do it, and I think we should evaluate it. So I think we should actually find out what children need to know, not only from asking them, because any young person you ask about sex education wants it now, whether they're, 14, 12, 10 or 9.
Let me ask anyone in the audience here who has some anxieties about the degree of detail with which primary school children might be educated about sex. Is there anyone who feels in any way uncomfortable? Yes.
Yes, I do. The reason for that is that it's not always clear what is being taught. To some extent, it is presented as kind of realistic and truthful and scientific and all that. At the same time, you could also say it's kind of ideological as well. I've got 4 children. They know, I think, a lot about sex, but I wouldn't be comfortable with the school telling them that. I'm much more comfortable me telling them that.
The gentleman sitting behind me is unusual in that he has the confidence to talk to his children about these things when many parents are equally as confused as some teachers are because of the mixed messages that they're getting throughout the media. And it's as much about working alongside parents and supporting them as well to be able to talk to their children.
I'm going to pick up on parents specifically in just a moment. Let's pause there because Teachers TV conducted an opinion poll on this aspect of sex education. It shows that 61% of parents do not want SREs for under 11s and a further 30% don't want it for under 7s. It is clearly, Jill Francis, delicate territory, isn't it?
It is delicate territory, but the basis that I've always worked on is that you start giving the basics when you start getting the questions. And that means that 3-year-olds will ask, where did my little brother come from? So you do have to find some sort of answer or lie. And then I think what's remarkable.
And lying is out, even if it's postponing the question.
Absolutely out, because it just confuses and frightens, and frightening and shame and promoting shame with children is just frightful. I think what's interesting in Hackney is Hackney has had an existingly high teenage pregnancy rate, and they've reduced their teenage pregnancy rate dramatically in the last couple of years.
But is that to do with what's happening in primary schools?
It's to do with a whole mosaic of things that are happening in Hackney, but it has to be one of those crucial elements that Hackney is being so good at providing sex education, and I think that's all credit to them, really.
Anna Rayburn, is there anything that you don't answer openly, honestly, and give, which is perfectly possible to do, an extension of a direct answer in order to give a context for what you're saying? Is there any age at which you say no, if you've got a precocious 5, 6-year-old?
There are two things we haven't touched on because we're talking to teachers. One is that children of any age do not go into school without any idea at all about sex. They have ideas about sex from home. I believe that children are like sponges. I believe they have views, they have heard things, seen things, felt things, intuited things, and made up their own mind. And they may have made up their minds rightly, and they may have made up their minds erroneously, but they have an image to start with. The difficulty of teaching sex and relationship education in school is twofold. First of all, you may get it right for that group of children, you may get it wrong for that group of children. And the second thing is that it places an immense onus, as Miriam said, on the teacher. The teacher has to meet all those needs, and that's difficult. And it's so much easier to look at a group of children and say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other thing, than it is to say, you might, it's possible that, you could feel. It is possible. But the thing that Jill has just said, which is so truthful, is this thing about the truth. When a kid asks you a question, they want an answer. Then it's got to be sufficient unto the day. I do not myself feel comfortable about telling a 5-year-old child this is a tampon. But if you do it in a calm, nice, agreeable way, they're going to find one sooner or later. What's the problem?
Can I bring in Ruth? Because I did promise you, Ruth Hilton. The primary school issue. Do you think there's any problem with going? I mean, I cited the poll. Majority of parents very uncomfortable with it.
And interestingly enough, other polls, particularly work done by the World Health Organization, indicates that 96% of parents do want schools to deliver sex education and do want it started at primary age.
So there's statistics and statistics.
Right?
So, Essie, on the edge here, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, apparently I'm at the end where I receive girls who have, become pregnant, and support them until they go back into education. And with the experience that I have from how they got pregnant and, the problem that they go through, I found out that majority of them, if they had this information before they went into secondary school, it will have helped them a lot. And that is right from home. And also, I support the idea that teachers should be encouraged and taught on how to teach young people sex education. Yeah.
I want now, I'll try and get everyone in due course. I want now to broaden this out a bit again to all schools. You touched on the end, as it were, post-secondary or at secondary and primary and how they link together. Let's look at it more generally. The Teacher TV poll I referred to shows that most parents don't want, apparently, more explicit reference to the wide variety of sexual practice and preference that abounds. In particular, in this poll, which is a scientific poll, incidentally, insofar as public opinion polling is scientific, some 25% don't actually want homosexuality mentioned. Anna, how explicit does one get with young people on these areas of sexual activity, sexual preference?
I don't actually like the image which was given me many years ago on a radio programme of telling young children about being interested in rubber and leather. I do think that you have to mention the fact that the world is made up of a variety of people, and they have quite different choices, quite different options. And I don't think you have to labour it any more than that. There is an enormous sensitivity both to homophobia and to almost an overemphasis on our gay brothers and sisters, which we must bring up at every opportunity. And striking the balance is extremely difficult, but this is putting the cart before the horse. We do not have, at the moment, a commitment to educating our children about sexuality. We don't have it. It's piecemeal. Where it comes through well, it comes through well, and where it falls down, and we have people in front of us who have picked themselves up and dusted themselves off and tried again. So I think this is begging the question. I think when a kid asks you a question, you answer the question. If the parents are upset and insulted about that, then as you said at the very beginning, Jane, that's a conversation that's going to be had between the relevant teachers or the head teacher and those parents. This is the business of teaching, isn't it?
Alice Smith, there you are. You are actually introducing, am I right, the education about homosexuality into your teaching?
Well, as a part of a whole teaching about sexuality, it's not explicitly homosexuality.
Surely not. But you are, as it were, encouraging the understanding of the fact that a significant proportion of those young people and others are homosexual?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how do you set about that?
Well, we're just trialling it at the minute. We haven't actually got underway with it because we want to research it and do it properly. We don't want to go in and upset parents, upset kids, upset anyone. We want to make sure that we do it thoroughly and understanding everything that needs to be done. So we're in the process of that because, you know, we want to do it properly.
And what do you say, or what do you propose to say to that proportion of parents, whatever it may be, who say, I just don't want my child to be discovering these things at this age? It'll come soon enough.
That 1 in 10 people are homosexual and more are bisexual. There are people who, you know, are of different sexualities, and it is found that homosexual teenagers in particular suffer a lot of abuse at school and are at risk of suicide. So these are issues that need to be discussed and confronted so that, you know, everyone can gain an understanding.
Ros Collins, down here, what's your thought about this? You come from a faith community, yes?
Yes, I represent.
Do you have
AT.
unease about the teaching, for instance, of homosexuality or not?
The religion itself does.
I know.
And so, therefore, when we go into Jewish schools, which is the work that we do at Jewish schools and Jewish youth groups, it depends on the ethos of the school. And we listen to what the teachers... sexual health and SRE comes under the Jewish Studies Department and comes under the rabbis. So, therefore, we have to listen to their ethos. One thing we absolutely insist is that if questions are raised, we actually answer the questions. So we, again, don't avoid anything that's put to us.
Do you... This is I suppose can be a dilemma. If you actually believe it is wrong from your faith, do you say both, yes, we'll answer the question, this is what happens, but we believe that this is bad, immoral behaviour, or what?
We leave morals to the rabbis. We actually talk about facts and issues. It's up to the young people to decide for themselves.
Yeah, sure.
Jonathan, we're talking about real people here, and children understand it. They understand that their uncles, their parents, their teachers, their friends are gay or lesbian. And I think that we should be talking about people rather than talking about what they actually do sexually. And that's what I think is incredibly important, just in sex education across the whole curriculum, that we don't actually avoid talking about lesbian and gay people.
Jane, at your school, how do you handle this?
It's mentioned, it's discussed. I mean, we have an on-site health centre which runs every lunchtime, and youngsters that want to explore certain issues that are raised in sex and relationship classes are able to go along and talk in a confidential way. But I think we're making a big issue about this. I mean, we're not going to give hours and hours of lesson time on homosexuality. If the youngsters want to know about it, they're going to be told about it. It's no big deal.
Right.
We're making a big deal out of it.
It's much better to have it taught that way, to have it mentioned that way, than to have it come up through a pop programme where you're encouraged to idealise somebody who you can see isn't quite like you, and somehow he's made it, but you don't think that you'll ever make it.
OK, let me just continue through, because we've touched on parents and the role of parents, but we haven't explored, because the teacher's role is obviously in the context of what parents do or don't do themselves, and we've had their attitudes. The poll shows that 75% of parents, suggests, have no idea if their teenage children are sexually active or not. 25%, apparently, have never even discussed the issue. Now, Bethany, I know that your dad is here. How did you two do on that front?
Terribly badly, probably. It's very difficult. I mean, the problem is there's so much information flowing around. I'm not quite sure what the schools are doing because they're all doing it slightly differently. The internet and all the other sources of information young people get. I mean, my kids, my daughter, etc., must be terribly confused sometimes by it all. There's a plethora of information coming through. There's the moral bit. We try and reinforce that, but there's the mechanics, which is always a little bit more awkward as a parent, as you can appreciate.
Because both sides are inclined to say yuck at the thought of the discussion.
That's right, yeah.
That's my case, anyway. Essie?
Yeah, knowing fully well that parents are the child's first educator, it is very important for parents to be able to talk to their children about sex and relationship education. So at this moment, I'm just looking at it that it is important for parents to know about it so that they will be able to talk about it. You say you can talk to children about tampon. If parents are, taught to talk to their children about tampon, when they say it, then when you confront them in school regarding that, it will be difficult for the children to understand it.
Bethany, I should have asked you, how did your dad do?
Well, yeah. To be honest, I always feel that it's a partnership. It's the school and it's the family. I think it should come from both, definitely.
Yes.
I'm Bethany's mother, and I think
it's good to have the family here.
Broad view of what actually happened. I've brought Bethy and her sister up in a way that I think it's important that they learn to find out for things for themselves. So from a very young age, when they found it difficult to talk to me, I tried to find a way of getting them to learn for themselves. So I did find that there was a time when they were very shy about talking about things, and however I approached it and however sensitively I tried to approach it and find information, I couldn't quite get there, and I knew I wasn't making the mark, and I didn't know anyone else who was going to be able to help me make the mark. But what I did find was that there were actually very interesting magazines. And when we actually talked earlier about magazines are very bad for kids, I did actually find that there were some very informative things going on in the youth's magazines today. They informed me, and I certainly looked at those magazines and decided it was time to leave them on the coffee table. And they looked at them, and they learned for themselves, but they then had the confidence to talk to me as well, and they talked amongst themselves with their magazines, with their friends.
Sounds you did rather better than your husband on this.
He didn't need to do an awful lot, actually.
Women do much better than their husbands, even with boys. I think that's very important to recognise. We've heard some very motivated parents, Joost and Bethany's parents. We need to remember that this programme of sex and relationship education is an important programme for promotion of health, mental and physical. And those that are most at risk generally do not have motivated parents. And so school has a hugely important role in filling in for most parents. When we run Parents' Evening for our programme, about 20% of parents attend. About 5% are grossly anti-sex education, and we usually convince them to join in the programme. 15% are highly motivated parents who've come along to see how they can work with the school in exactly the way Bethany suggested. But the 80% of parents we want to see, who won't talk to their children, aren't there. So school has, unfortunately, a huge responsibility. And this is a major societal responsibility. We have an epidemic of STIs. There's no other word for it. And it's because we're not facing up to the problem as a society and a nation.
Which neatly takes us to the point where we have to pause. If parents, as we've been discussing, really find it very difficult to discuss sex with their children, then, of course, there's a huge burden of responsibility that falls on a variety of potential sex education providers. How should SRE be delivered? Touch on what John just mentioned. And who should be doing it? That's in a moment. Welcome back to the big debate. Our topic, sex education. The evidence is that most parents shy away from discussing the facts of life with their children. So the responsibility for SRE, of course, falls on the teachers. But many teachers feel inadequate to that task. They feel they need training or some form of specialist help. Let's hear why from some teachers and SRE providers based at Kings Manor Community College in West Sussex.
Is it safer to wear 2 condoms or 3 or 4?
Whoa! Okay. There is an element of, you're worried about them telling you things you don't want to know and asking you things you don't really want to say. And, you need training in avoiding those situations and heading them off before they arrive. When they say, oh, and how was it when you used a condom, miss? Just like, I'm not answering that one.
Many teachers are apprehensive and can be quite scared, but hopefully once they've had the training, they feel more confident. And some teachers even come back after the training to practice and to get used to handling some of the equipment that we use, or come back and ask questions, so that when they do come to teach it, they feel confident and they feel comfortable. Right, lots of people think...
I made the mistake of saying to them, let's write all the words we can think of to do with sex on the board.
Oh no, God.
Oh yes.
Is that when you found out about Spanish
when...
kids?
No, that wasn't. And it's when the kid put the hand up and said the C word.
C word, yeah.
And I was like, oh bugger, how do I deal with that?
Don't give out any of your demonstration tools until you've finished your initial demonstration, because they won't be listening to you, they'll be playing with the toys.
No personal history, no personal stories, that nobody's going to laugh or take the mickey about somebody else, so that there's a safe atmosphere so everyone can get together and talk and have fun and actually learn lots of stuff.
Don't presume that the students know a lot about sex and relationships education, as often they don't.
Well, sex ed is about relationships, it's not about having sex. And I think it's important that you stress the fact that it's about relationships and about how people show they love each other.
The challenge for teachers. Jamil, Martin, like you, did that ring bells with you when you heard that?
It is important for a teacher to feel confident in actually being able to actually teach about sex and relationship education, and also having an open forum in the classroom, especially for 9 to 10-year-old children. They have so many things that they get from the media, from TV programmes. In some ways they're confused, but in other ways they know a lot more than we think they do.
Jane?
I think sex and relationship education taught badly is worse than no sex and relationship education at all. That's the first thing. Certainly in my school, I wish for my young people to have the benefit of a well-trained teacher of sex and relationship education, and I'm delighted to say I have somebody who's qualified to do that. And I think the issues that worry...
Who helps the other teachers as well?
Yes, there is a key person who delivers sex and relationship education. I mean, years ago, as a form teacher, you were expected to deliver the pastoral curriculum. There are teachers in my school who are brilliant at teaching their subject, but I wouldn't dream of asking them to teach sex and relationship education. It would be unfair, they would hate it, and they'd probably leave my school, and I would lose out.
Miriam, do you think that form teachers should be given the task of teaching SRE?
Well, from the study we did, there was a variety of ways in which SRE is taught. Some form teachers were expected to teach it, and in some cases it was specialist teachers. And the young people we talked to had different views on what parts of SRE they want taught by form teachers and what parts by, for example, the school nurses. And very often the more confidential issues, they prefer to have a school nurse talk to them about it, because it meant that they weren't judged by their teachers and they had a more distant relationship with the school nurse than with a regular form teacher. But the third method, and probably the most usual method nowadays for teaching SRE, is to do what's called timetable collapse, and for the schools to have a day, a term, in which they spend with the whole year group talking about these kinds of issues and using different methods from the conventional ones. For example, having play groups come in and talk about it in a way that distances it from the personal issues, so that they talk about relationships in a more distant setting than about individual pupils themselves.
Let me bring in on this, on the question of trained and training teachers and trained specialists. Tunde Alienka, you run the Teenage Pregnancy Unit at Kensington and Chelsea, don't you?
The Teenage Pregnancy Project, yes.
What does that involve, and what are you achieving, if anything?
Well, basically, we provide training to school nurses, teachers, but beyond that, to any professional who works with young people, because I think in this debate has focused on teachers, but I think it's unfair that the burden of SRE falls entirely on teachers. I think every professional who works with young people should be trained and offer training in how to deal with SRE.
Have you seen yet any reduction in the levels, for instance, of teenage pregnancies or sexually transmitted diseases?
Absolutely. We've had massive reductions in using the method that I've just spoken about.
What sort of scale?
Our figures were at 49 in 1,000. They're now down to 27.
Which is way lower. It's a much bigger fall than large parts of the country.
It was the second largest in the country.
Natasha, you're involved in peer education, aren't you? As part of this, and how does that work? What do you do?
Well, as a young parent myself, I go to schools and teach what it's like to be a teenage parent, the responsibilities, and also teach them sex and education to make them understand what it's like, and it's not easy.
And do you think it would seem self-evident in a way that because they can look at you as someone who is much their age, that they say, yeah, I take the message. But is the message in part the sort of message that John Tripp would, as it were, like you to give? I don't want to put words in his mouth. Postpone having a child if you possibly can because.
Because your education is more important. I do agree with what he says. As I'm still young, I don't want people to follow me and go down the same step that I did. I want them to do better for themselves.
John, come in on that.
The real problem is not what you say, but the message that comes to the young people. Yeah. You're a very attractive young mum, and they see a young mum who's successful. She's got it together, she's had her baby, here she is talking to us, she's nicely dressed, she's got a lovely baby. The message that goes to young people is not necessarily the message that we expect. So we have to be very careful in the way...
You mean it could be this is actually rather an attractive option?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful in the way that we use peer education. And I come back to my earlier point that we have to evaluate the work that we do very carefully. And internationally, we're not very good at that. The Americans are much better at it. But there isn't any evidence, actually, that having babies to look after, having young mums into school, does, in fact, impact on young people's behaviour.
Are you saying, I mean, you wouldn't put it as cruelly as that, are you saying that it's counterproductive?
I'm not saying that because we don't know.
Right.
I think we just need to find out more.
On the question, just briefly and more generally, Jill Francis, if you would, the government is providing resources for some 2,000 training teachers. Is that beginning to get to the heart of the problem?
I think it is, but there are over 24,000 schools, so any mathematician can work out that it's going to take a long time to train all those teachers. So obviously government's got to work harder at training more teachers. I also think we've got to be a bit careful, because part of the reason why it's difficult for teachers to teach sex education is because we make it difficult. I mean, there's lots of teachers out there who teach absolutely brilliant sex education, and that's why we know it's brilliant, because we can see them doing it. And I think that we can make it too difficult a problem. It's our society that finds it difficult to talk about sex. And if we as a society found it more comfortable, then parents will be talking about it, teachers will be talking about it, doctors and nurses will be talking about it. It would just make it much more easy, which is what I think's happened in countries like Holland. I think people are a lot more relaxed about talking about it. Oh, well, the young people are having sex, we better talk about it. It's much more pragmatic.
Question, should it or should it not be compulsory in schools? Obviously, you can't make it compulsory in society. Well, you could try. In schools, should it be compulsory? You think it should be compulsory, don't you, Bethany? Because you led a group to Downing Street saying so. Why should it be compulsory?
I think it's just really important. I think it's very important for young people to form their own attitudes and beliefs. They should be given information, they should be told this, and then they should decide. It shouldn't be the other way around. I don't think it should be make your beliefs, oh yeah, and then you can, if your school decides to, if you're given the opportunity, then you can learn about it. I think all schools, and like from before we were said, how I said it's quite patchy, I think there should be like a uniform layer over the entire country, because it shouldn't be fair that some places are getting nothing and some places get other. It's just not fair.
Very clearly put. Alice, you wanted to...
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you. It needs to be made compulsory so that schools start to take it seriously, because so many schools, they have priorities with their league tables, their GCSE results. They can't take sex and relationships education seriously. And that's also with the amount of time that's given over to it. I'm very lucky in that I have 6 weeks for every single year in my school to teach just sex and relationships education, but that in a way isn't enough.
Just one thing on that. Would you allow or encourage parents who, for whatever reason, did not want their child to be so taught to opt out, or does compulsory mean compulsory when it becomes, of course, part of the curriculum?
There should always be an opt-out option. I mean, what studies have found is that of parents who are given the opt-out option, it's less than 1% who do actually opt out. I'm not saying, you know, but the national curriculum is compulsory. In terms of science education, it is compulsory to teach the reproductive parts.
OK, let me then, Miriam David, if you deal with this that arises out of that, if it's compulsory, then you have to presumably have some way, given the obsession or need for measurement, to have some way of measuring achievement, whether it's reaching targets, assessment. Well, how can you do that in this field?
Well, that's part of the problem that has already been raised, which is most aspects of the education system now and school system are assessed, and we have an increasingly competitive league table approach to the curriculum, which is why SRE and PSHE and all those other subjects have been squeezed out.
Would you bring it back in?
We need to squeeze them back in, make sure that the subjects are not necessarily evaluated in this way, because, as Bethany and others have said, this is a fundamental part of a truly liberal, open, democratic society, to be able to talk about emotional issues and issues of relationships, as well as sex and sexuality, as part of what it is to be a citizen of any society, but of Britain in this case.
Anyone who hasn't been in yet who wants in? Yes, right in the middle here in the front row.
On that point of PSRVE and those sorts of schemes and subjects, I think it's quite important that it's structured and sustained, that there's a real commitment over a long period, as opposed to lip service of what I had. I'm now 22, and I had at school was perhaps one day in the year where our teacher decided to introduce this incredibly important subject in really rather a rushed way. So I think if we do bring it back, it does have to be sustained.
Dr. Churi, from your perspective, which you outlined earlier, what do you think about compulsory or voluntary?
According to our parents, they think it should be taught by schools, because parents find it difficult to address this issue. And the schools have to take the responsibility how much they teach. So when you talk from the scientific point of view, when you're teaching science as a curriculum, you introduce that as well. But then again, for the PHSC teachers, the emotional part and the behavior part should be taught by them. But when you're touching science, you have to teach it anyway.
But should it be compulsory that all children, but perhaps allowing opt-out, should be taught SRE?
Science is a compulsory subject. So when you're teaching that issue in science, why not?
OK. I think I know your view on this, Anna.
Oh, I would like to see it taught much more widely. I would like to see government invest in it. And I would like to say that the first meeting I ever went to in the House of Commons talked first about one subject, then about a second subject, then came to sex education. That was 40 years ago, and we're still arguing about it. We still haven't made decisions about it. We still haven't committed funds to it. We still haven't taken this one on board. And I think that is a terrible, terrible social waste of time. It's a waste of youth.
And there we have to pause. In fact, we have to close. The government has ruled out compulsion so far, saying it doesn't want to be, I quote, prescriptive. Judging by what we've just heard, it could be that it's a nettle that the government, for one reason or other, doesn't actually want to grasp. I'm not sure. The debate, anyway, will go on. To you, panel, audience, thank you very much, and goodbye.